All right, so you guys know who I am. My name's Wendy Howell. I'm the Deputy Director of Colorado Working Families Party. I have also spent about 15 years as a labor organizer with both SEIU and AFT, two of the nation's largest unions. And if you don't know what those stand for, that's okay. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So what we're doing, what this is about, this piece that I'm doing is about working with the labor movement. In particular, understanding the labor movement and how to build effective coalitions with the labor movement and its leaders. So this is the agenda. Essentially, we're going to talk about how to understand the labor union, or labor movement rather. What is a union? How do they work? That sort of stuff. And then we'll talk about how to effectively interact with that. All right? So before I get any further, is anybody in this room a union member? Or retiree?
I don't know. I was in Buffalo.
That cool. That counts. What union were you in?
UUP, Union University.
Nice. Nice. That's AFT, yeah?
I wasn't really, I was a very weak participant. I was a free rider, and I've been reflecting on that in the past couple of weeks, actually.
Fair enough. All right. Yeah, UUP is AFT, I can tell you, because I used to work with AFT in Vermont, so not far away. The first thing y'all should know is that unions are a little bit different than any other kind of organization you will encounter. And that is because they are absolutely and truly democracies. They are little democracies. All they are is a group of workers that have come together to try to accomplish things together that they could not accomplish alone. And when I did this a minute ago over in the chapel, somebody brought up the West Virginia teachers' strikes. You can imagine if one teacher stood outside one school in West Virginia with a sign, that would not get a single headline. But when 10,000 teachers do it and take over the Capitol for 5 days, that makes national headlines. Unions are essentially a representation of the old saying, there is strength in numbers, or sticks in a bundle don't break. The list of cliches goes on, but it's true. And I put a C also down here. Unions democratize the workplace. They bring democracy into a workplace. What do I mean by that? So I don't know how well you can see my little stick figures here, but this guy wearing the top hat is the boss. He's the guy who controls the purse strings in whatever company, organization, etc. The one who ultimately makes the decisions. There are only two legal statuses for employment in the United States. One is at will. That is the legal term for non-union. It means you work at the will of the employer. The only other option to that is, in US labor law, is union. In an at-will environment, the boss makes 100% of the decisions 100% of the time. You have no binding, and no worker has any binding power. Workers can beg, they can plead, they can cry, they can kiss butt, they can do all manner of things to try to influence the decision, but they ultimately have no power to make the decision about what working conditions look like, wages, benefits, all other working conditions. In a union environment, that changes, because legally, both sides have to negotiate over all of the working conditions in a place. Wages, hours, safety, etc. And so you can see the boss, the boss doesn't like that too much. I mean, would any of you like giving up half your power? No, you wouldn't. Nobody likes giving up power, let's be honest. Human beings don't like that, that's human nature. But this is a little bit more equitable of an arrangement in which everybody's interest gets met. The basic process of how you organize a union, just so you all know, there's usually workers will sign cards saying, union authorization card saying, yes, I want the union and I want this union to be my union. It says that in legalese, but that's basically what it says. Once a majority have signed them, the boss has, and I use boss to encapsulate not just like frontline managers, but like really the decision makers. CEOs, CFOs, et cetera, the folks who are really making those decisions. They have a choice to either recognize the union at that point and say, oh, a majority of you signed cards. Great, we'll let you be in, we'll start bargaining with you. Or they can demand that folks have an election in most places. You guys have any thoughts on how often the boss just goes, okay, yay, union?
0.
Yeah, less than 0.5%. And usually it's because it's in a contract somewhere that they have to. So then that election comes around. What do you think happens between the boss realizing that there are union cards going around and an election date?
Fire the organizers.
They might. That's illegal, but they might. They might try to do that.
Lots of meetings where the boss has offered to listen to employees.
Yes. The best anti-union campaigns have a carrot and a stick. The carrot is, we really hear you. We're really sorry. We'll do better. We promise. And the stick is, and if you don't believe us, then watch out. And that happens in just about every union organizing campaign. Sometimes they pay anti-union consultants millions of dollars to come in and try to stop the union organizing drive that is trying to happen between here and here. It gets pretty awful. But then let's say workers win their union. Then that's a big fight that they have just won. Then they have to bargain their first contract. They actually have to go in and get stuff written down on paper about what those wages and hours and working conditions and safety things and all of those things are going to be in a written, legally binding contract. Do you think the boss wants to do that? Especially after they just, lost? So usually that takes a lot of fighting, too. Right? To get folks, to get the boss adjusted to the new normal, essentially. And then once, let's say these workers win this contract, which is frankly usually even a harder fight than organizing in the first place, then they have to enforce it. Which, bosses often treat contracts, heck, they treat labor law sometimes, a lot like most people treat the speed limit. And so it's a suggestion. I can skate a little bit over here if I'm going around this curve, and no. And sometimes you just pedal to the metal. I don't care if it's 50, I'm going 90. Right? And so you have to have mechanisms to enforce your contract, and those are both like sort of paper and legalistic that end in arbitration, as well as organizing responses. So I don't know if any of y'all have noticed the pickets outside Kaiser recently, but that's a part of this. Okay. But unions don't just, they don't just organize workers and deal with bargain contracts, right? Unions do a lot more than that because they are a reflection of the needs, wants, and desires of that membership body, right? So up here, they work in the workplace level, affecting working conditions on the, at the workplace level. It's also where the union is usually most visible to workers. But they also work at an industry level. Good example of that, like to try to set industry standards. 2 examples of that. One is the Las Vegas Strip. 70% of those casinos and hotels are organized. And guess what? The other 30% of casinos and hotels on the Strip typically pay just about the same in wages and benefits. Why do you think that is? Why? What are they afraid of? Competition, yeah. Keeping workers.
Or get unionized.
Exactly. So in Vegas, on the Strip, the union sets the standards, the working standards for the whole industry, even the non-union workers in it. Same is true for the healthcare industry in California, where 70% of, I think it's actually closer to 80 now, of hospitals, nursing homes, and home care workers are unionized. Unions set the standards for healthcare in California. Which brings me to society. So unions don't just work on industry-specific stuff or workplace-specific stuff. Anybody heard of this little thing called the Fight for 15? The Fight for 15? Yeah, the fight to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, which has been making international headlines, and it had international involvement. Unions are founded on the premise that it's not just about lifting up the workers in them up, it's about lifting up all workers. That's what the labor movement is about bettering standards for workers across the country, and in some cases, internationally. And so, case in point, same healthcare industry, that union density that we have in California in the healthcare field. Guess who were the major drivers behind passing nurse-to-patient ratios, bans on mandatory overtime, needle stick protections, etc., in the healthcare industry in California? Unions. Because guess what? That was good for the workers. It was also good for society. And it didn't matter if you were a union nurse or a non-union nurse. You should not have 10 patients because that's not good for anybody. Right? FMLA, OSHA standards, all of those sorts of things, raising the minimum wage, right? Because the truth is, all of these three things connect. You can't have one without the other. You need laws at a societal level determine how easy it is to organize a union, how easy it is to keep one, right? How strong, there's all kinds of wars going on about union political contributions, right? Never mind that corporations can write unlimited checks however they want, right? And you can't have a strong workplace if you're weak in these two other areas. So all of these things go together, and union leaders are constantly trying to figure out how do they balance all of this stuff, particularly in this really rather hostile anti-union environment we find ourselves in, say, post-2016, right? So, in terms of the internal structure of unions, unions have both elected leaders, which are here in red, and staff leaders, which are here. This is one of the things that makes unions very distinct from other organizations, which are really staff-driven. So unions elect a president. If you're talking to a building trades union, they also have a president, but the real number one is called the business manager. I don't know why. The building trades are weird. God bless them. But they have a number one officer. They usually have a secretary, treasurer, VPs. Some unions, they elect their union representatives, and some other unions, union representatives are staff. Those are the folks who go out and full-time work on contract enforcement and that sort of stuff. And then there are rank and file elected leaders. Usually these are called stewards. Sometimes they're called unit chairs or have another title. But there are shop floor leaders who, continue working their normal job full-time, but also do contract enforcement and union building as a part of, being a leader in their workplace. And then staff, you've got sort of normal political, executive, organizing, et cetera, kind of staff. So let me ask you guys this. Let's say you really wanted to approach a union to get them signed on to a letter of support for an issue you were working on. Who would you want to go to? So that's a lot of leaders. The political director is a decent place to start. Yeah, that's not a bad place to start. Where's the other place you could start? No, don't go to a steward. Don't go to a steward. You want to start up here. Think of unions, this is one of the ways that, like, you know, a normal organization, you could go to any organizer and it would be fine. Unions, because they are democracies, are inherently political. And if you go to somebody who is not the head honcho, you might unwittingly be stepping into the bear trap of, you just talked to someone in a minority faction in the union who's a royal pain in the butt. Okay, so be aware of internal, let's say, small d democratic dynamics within unions are a thing. It's always safe to start with the number one. And a political director is also a good person to start with, but you'll never get faulted for calling the president first. Yeah. Yep. And in fact, many of these other folks will tell you, call the president, call the business manager, or in some cases, call the political director. Yeah. Now, in addition to individual unions, which a process I described for organizing, et cetera, like that can happen for folks who are forming an independent union that has never existed before and are creating something from scratch. Same process if they're, organizing to join a 2 million member union, right? But unions themselves often organize into federations. Why? It's just continuing that whole strength in numbers thing. There's hundreds of unions across the country, international unions, national unions across the country. If, there's an attack on the labor movement as a whole, let's say somebody tries to pass right to work nationally, you don't necessarily want, 180 people having to try to figure it out on their own, 180 different unions figuring it out on their own. There's a federation for that who provides that support. So here in Colorado, we have the statewide federation called the Colorado AFL-CIO. You don't need to know what that stands for. Some folks in it don't know what that stands for, but it's the American Federation of Labor and Congress of Industrial Organizations, if you care. Most people just call it the Colorado AFL. They keep it real short and simple. And there's also local federations that are under the state federation here. Boulder Area Labor Council, Denver Area Labor Federation, which have the sexy acronyms of BALC and DALF. And there's several others. There's 6 local labor federations around the state, all regionally based. And then there's other groups and federations that kind of exist. These are the big ones. These are sort of the main ones. So you have the building trades. I mentioned those construction workers. My goodness, they have very specific concerns. The bricklayers and the masons and the plumbers and the pipe fitters and the electrical workers who all work, they have very specific things, and they also run hiring halls, which is a little different model of unionism than a lot of other places. So they have a thing called the Trades Council, where they all come together to discuss their issues. And then Jobs with Justice. Has anyone here heard of Jobs with Justice? A couple of you. Yeah. So their role, they're a nonprofit organization. They have a lot of union leaders and community leaders on their board. They work to bring community into labor struggles and bring labor into community struggles, essentially. They exist to kind of be that two-way street. They're an awesome place to start with a lot of stuff. And there are others. I've heard tell of interfaith labor coalitions, and there was the Blue-Green Alliance for quite some time, and just all kinds of stuff that unions are involved in. But these are some good places to start. And by the way, I have handouts and lists for y'all if you're interested in them, so I will give them to you if you are. And then you should also know kind of who the major national unions are. So we've got NEA, SEIU, AFSCME, IBT, UFCW, AFT, USW. Anybody? Acronym soup, alphabet soup. Anybody know what any of these stand for? Yeah.
National Education Association.
Correct. Who's in that union?
Teachers.
Teachers and support staff. Yep. Yep. Service Employees International Union. Yep. Who's in that union?
Custodial.
Custodial. Who else?
Like gambling, card dealers at casinos?
No. A little bit. They have three major divisions: healthcare, public sector, and building services. So it's janitors, but also security officers and airport workers that are in that building services division. AFSME. Anyone know what that stands for? You are good. There you go. Yeah, all public employees. That one. State, county, municipal employees. Not federal, though. Some people mistake the F for Federation, yeah. IBT, International Brotherhood of Teamsters. You got it. You got it. UFCW. Nice. Nope, commercial. Yeah, she was right. Commercial. Who do they have? Yep, grocery stores. And other retail kind of stuff. They also, interestingly enough, have about 1,000 professional healthcare workers at Kaiser.
Is that who's ticketing?
No, that's SEIU. SEIU and UFCW split Kaiser. And UFCW started organizing healthcare workers because they started organizing pharmacists in grocery and drugstores. And that just kind of bled into, hey, these pharmacists over here in this actual healthcare facility. Yeah. Oh, I didn't ask, the Teamsters, who do they represent? Truckers, yep. Usually the longshoremen, but there are some Teamsters down there too. Yep. The other big one is factory workers. They have a ton of factory workers around here in particular. Our UPS facility, which is one of the largest in the country, over here, that's the other big one, is UPS, is the size of, I think, 5 or 6 football fields or something. That thing is massive. And yeah, thousands of Teamsters in that place. Yeah. They also have the bud plant up in Fort Collins and the meat cutting plant in Fort Morgan and lots of industrial stuff like that. AFT. Yeah. American Federation of Teachers, correct. Yeah, and same thing as NEA, teacher support staff. Also, university professors. Also, healthcare workers, which they got to because they started organizing school nurses. Yep. And USW, I'll give you a clue on that one. Oh, I didn't even have to give you the clue. Good job, guys. Yeah. So, yeah, United Steelworkers. They're still pretty big down in Pueblo. Yep. These, in order, are the top 7 unions nationally in terms of membership.
Is that right?
Yep. NEA is number 1.
Thank God.
Yeah. So we were talking about labor federations before. Bonus points if any of you can tell me which 2 unions on here are not a member of the national AFL-CIO. Nope, the Teamsters are in there. NEA, yep. NEA is not a part of any labor federations. They stand apart always. And that is in part because they see themselves as a sort of hybrid professional association and union. The other one is SEIU. SEIU split off about a decade ago from the National Labor Federation to form another national labor federation called Change to Win, frankly because they were irritated that the national AFL-CIU wasn't investing enough in organizing. So, and they were joined by several other top 10 unions who are actually right here. SEIU is a part of local and state labor federations, though, for the most part. I say all this just to say, don't assume that every union is in every labor federation, because you will miss people if you do that. All right, so, actually I'll leave that down for y'all. A couple of tips for reaching out to unions. First off, try to understand people's interests. Like, the union is its members. It exists to build collective power to address things in industry, society, and the workplace. So if you are coming to speak to union leaders, that is their entirety of where their brain is how does this serve what our members need and the role that our union has to play. Because guess what? Also, they're elected. So they're not going to do anything crazy that their members hate, right? So think about how what you're approaching them on impacts their membership. And think outside the box on that. For example, you know the National Renewable Energy Lab over here? Do you know who cleans it? Union janitors. So guess what? If NREL funding is on the chopping block, guess what ally you have? A union that represents the people who clean it. Because gosh darn it, that's their jobs on the line, right? So think about those kinds of connections, right, that you might be able to find. And last but not least, make a very specific ask. Like many leaders, union leaders are very, very busy, overstressed, overworked people. If you go in and go, hey, I just kind of want to know what you think about this issue, you're going to get oh God, what do they want me to do? I don't have time for this. If you go in and go, hey, we just want you to sign on to this letter and maybe ask your lobbyist to deliver it to these 3 legislators, you're much more likely to get a yes, right, than sort of a broad, open-ended commitment, right? So be very specific in what you're asking for. And then last but not least, sorry, I realized I forgot one. Figure out who the union's leaders are, the president, the vice president, secretary, treasurer, et cetera, political director, and then figure out who knows them. Union people operating in all of these small d democratic places all the time, which frankly sometimes are a tempest in a teapot, a lot of the time are a tempest in a teapot because democracies are messy at any level, right? They are very relationship-oriented people because they want to know, okay, what's in the other hand a lot of the time, right? What do you really want? Get to the chase. So if you have somebody who can help make an introduction, that always, always helps. You don't have to necessarily, but it often helps. So figure out, use LinkedIn, use Facebook, who knows the folks that you're trying to actually reach out to that might be able to help you with that too. And give you some insight into their leadership styles, et cetera, as well. All right, I think that's all I have. I don't know. It looks like we might have 2 minutes for questions. So does anyone have a burning question? Go ahead.
I have 2, please. Why has the percentage of unionized workers been diminished so greatly since the 30s, let's say? Mm-hmm. And the other one is, who is working towards employee-owned and managed corporations in the United States from the union side, or are any unions working on that?
Perhaps. Where are you from originally? I have to ask.
I'm from Greece, but lived in the United States since 1964.
Okay. I couldn't tell if it was a German accent or not, and if you were German, I was going to geek out about works councils, but nobody else in the room needs that, so that's okay. Um, so in terms of the decline of unions, unions actually peaked around the 1950s, 1960s, and started to decline after that. A lot of reasons for that. One is sort of decreasing industrialization generally, but two, and this is probably most important, is sustained organized attacks on unions. Things like increasing number of right-to-work states, things like, making it harder to organize. And in the 1980s, a lot of people see the PATCO strike, the air traffic controllers strike, as one of sort of the critical moments where the labor movement started to really have trouble in America, because you had a former union president, former president of the Screen Actors Guild, elected president, and one of the first things he did was bust a major federal union. Something that for decades before was something that was unthinkable. You just didn't treat working people that way in politics. And Ronald Reagan did it, and he made it okay to do it. And now we have the Koch brothers, who are constantly talking about how the National Right to Work Committee with the unionfacts.com website, where do you really know your union? All corporate funded insanity. And it's just gotten worse and worse and worse and harder and harder and harder. That said, I will say there is hope, because millennials are overwhelmingly pro-union. It's almost like that when you graduate with a college degree and can only get $13, $14 an hour jobs that you can barely live on, with rent skyrocketing and student loan debt that you can't pay, that maybe you figure out that the economic system is rigged against you, and you think that you might want to do something a little bit different and stop listening to the nonsense. Like, maybe unions are a way to do that, So I think there's hope, based on this generation that is coming up now, but it's been a rough couple decades for the labor movement.
What about the second one about employee-owned and...
So there is, I don't work on that directly, but there's a great organization called the RMEOC, Rocky Mountain Employee Ownership Collective, Cooperative. I forget what the C stands for. Halisi Vinson is one of their folks there. It is awesome. They work day in, day out to help workers in Colorado set up employee-owned co-ops. Yep.
Could you repeat the name of that organization?
The RMEOC, Rocky Mountain Employee Ownership C something. I forget what the C stands for. EOC. Mm-hmm. Yep. And interestingly enough, you can be both union and employee owned, which is fascinating because I don't know who you bargain with, but it's been done. All right. Any other? I think I got time for one more.
Not a question.
Oh, wait. All right. Well,
Just a quick comment.
I got time? Oh, okay, never mind. Then
At
go
the
ahead.
Rise for Climate event 2 weeks ago, it was very significant that there was a strong labor awareness and component.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was the president of AFL-CIO in
Josh Downey,
Colorado
probably.
who spoke and said, we have not been happy with a lot of things going on, but we know that the climate issues will be addressed and we want to be part of the conversation. And so there was a very clear sense of, we are not just buying into the environmentalist agenda, but we want to be part of the conversation.
Yeah. Was that white guy or Latina woman?
Right.
Josh Downey, president of the Denver Area Labor Federation.
Okay.
Yeah. Josh has been a leading voice in the conversation around just transition work. And he has been working overtime to pull some of his, let's just say, more conservative members of the Labor Federation into having that conversation. Yeah. Sadly, we do have folks who take their role as serving members in the labor movement as all jobs are good jobs, jobs are king, doesn't matter where they are, which is how you lead to things like at Standing Rock, some of the building trades being over there heckling the protesters and the communications workers of America being on the other side going, what the hell is wrong with you, brothers and sisters?
That was actually more related to my question. I don't know exactly how to phrase it, but speaking of what Josh had said a couple of weeks ago too, he named, there are powerful myths that separate people from having a stronger unified movement to shift the economy. And he had named a myth that frontline communities experiencing the front lines of climate change and the rest, and environmental racism, there's a myth that those communities look at unions and like you've profited and had these amazing, well-paid jobs over the time on our backs in these polluting industries, and like we just need this much. We don't even need like your like that, and then like that division there. And I know it's hard to. I don't know much about unions, is why I'm here and stayed. But it's like in terms of history, I know that most of the civil rights movement had the origins in some part, well, both the strength of AME church organizing, but also the Pullman Porters. And the tensions between the Brotherhood of the Sleeping Car Porters is the first black union because they weren't allowed to be in the union that led to the National Railroads Union and the rest. I'm just curious where we are today in terms of social civil rights movements and labor movements, and how much are they combined and where are the fissures?
Sure. I would say it varies widely union to union. You have some unions that are very much on the more progressive end of the spectrum, and you have some unions that are very much on the more conservative end of the spectrum. I could, just as examples, if you wanted to go polar opposites, you could look at National Nurses United, the California Nurses Association, where Roseanne DeMoro, God bless her, is probably to the left of me. And most of their membership is too. They are radical, bomb-throwing, crazy people, and it's amazing. And then on the other hand, you have police unions, right? And it's just like for them, it's not even it's all about the thin blue line, and they're really anti-progressive in a lot of ways, and frankly don't even treat the rest of the labor movement very well, right? Every time I see a cop cracking heads on picket lines, I start singing Solidarity Forever. So I think it really depends on the union. Like I was telling that story from Standing Rock before, like you were not going to get the building trades up there, but gosh darn it, CWA provided some of the best jobs on the res, and people knew it. Those jobs that were organized with CWA were the best jobs you could get on the res. Communications Workers of America. And so I think there is a mixed history. Just in these top couple here, teachers unions, generally pretty inclusive because they have to teach everybody all across the country, right? SEIU represents janitors. Like one of the things SEIU is known for is the Justice for Janitors campaign. Also represent a lot of low-income healthcare workers, home care workers who get treated like dogs and do some critical, important work. And so it's a union that is heavily invested in the fight for immigration justice, right? AFSCME, one of the first unions that ever came on board for marriage equality. They were just like, that just makes sense, right? Like, but then you get down to like the Teamsters and you kind of go, just all I'm saying is go look at the staff list and the officer list on the Teamsters website and you'll see what I mean. You're in Colorado. Sad to say. Yep.
So I have a pretty dumb question, but also, I don't know, doesn't seem like it has an easy answer, but maybe you've thought about this. So every time I hear the term right to work, you know, it seems like such a misleading phrase to me. So I think of like guaranteed employment. You know? So
Right.
how do we get from our current situation with right to work to you know, jobs for everybody, you know, if they want it or can handle it? And I'll just add a tiny bit more. You know, some jobs that really need to be done, in looking at like our house, there's, like my husband would be really interested in making the house super efficient. It doesn't, that's supposed to be one of the best, most economical things that can be done to save energy, but the way everything's priced right now, it doesn't really pencil out. You know, there's just tons of work in that area. There's not a good way to pay for it, but I mean, like that's an area that just, you almost can't throw enough people at it in terms of jobs. I mean, and there are other areas of the economy where people are hurting, you know, the carrying industries. Yeah, there is work to be done if, you know, we figure out some of that. This is more Alex Bailiwick, and hopefully we can get him to come back and talk about some of this. But do you have some thoughts about how we get from right to work, this phrase that's never made sense to me, to like actual right to work?
Sure.
Or jobs for all?
I think it's important to recognize, so we at the Working Families Party, we talk about how economic and racial justice are inextricably linked. You cannot separate the two. You cannot. Sadly, some of the less progressive unions try to, the more progressive ones don't. But you cannot have one without the other, because people of color have been the bottom rung of the economy for a long time in America, starting with, you know, explorers landing and enslaving the natives. Like it just, you know, that's been true for a long time. So I feel like there is a shift that is happening. And it is happening across racial and ethnic lines. It is happening across a lot of lines. And it is this whole sense of like, you know, as progress was made in the civil rights movement in the 60s and, you know, et cetera, we know that right-wing organizations, right-wing think tanks were formed, lots of them around the country, to strategize how to beat back the radicalism of the 60s and put things back to where they ought to be. Part of that was institutionalized racism, the rise of the myth of the welfare queen, all of that, right? Another part of it was dismantling unions. These are all different heads of the same hydra, right? And it all comes out of that stuff. But what we are seeing is that people were buying into, with, you know, like neoliberalism and all of that stuff, people were buying into that sort of like, you know, merit-based bootstraps, like kind of mantra. I find it pretty libertarian mantra, you know, in this country for a couple decades. But it feels like in the last couple of years, particularly, folks have really started to wake up. And you know who is the most woken up? Are the millennial generation that is drowning in student loan debt. They can't get a house because their student loans are the size of a mortgage. And they're just kind of in this rut where they also can't find good jobs. They're working in retail and making $13 an hour, or bussing tables or waiting tables. Because even with a college degree, they can't find, you know, high-level salaried professional work. And so they've realized that this system has been built to mess people up, including them, because they did all the right things and they still can't get ahead. And so they are increasingly more and more pro-union because they're trying to figure out a way to, to get ahead, to fix that, to right those injustices in the system. And it feels like that pendulum is really swinging back, that people have realized that that shift is not actually really to the benefit of most people. It's only really benefiting a very few number of people, and that trickle down just doesn't. Right?
Thank you so much. Wendy. We really appreciate this. So Wendy did double duty today. Do we have any pressing last questions here? Hey, Michael, could you check on NOAA and see if they're done? Otherwise, I think maybe we can take a 5-minute break.
Just a quickie.
Yep.
I understand the United Steelworkers is trying to build a coalition with Mondragon Cooperative. And I wonder if any other unions are trying to cooperate with cooperatives.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's been true in different places, but I'm not thinking of anybody at the moment. But I've seen unions work with co-ops in the past. Heck, I've seen unionized co-ops in the past. So yeah, I just don't have a lot of great examples for you. I'm sorry. Yeah. All right. Yeah.
What are unions doing with respect to the up-and-coming automation and artificial intelligence? It seems to me that the jobs are not going to be taken by the Chinese, they're going to be taken by machines.
Oh, you are really asking the billion-dollar questions. Not even the million-dollar question, the billion-dollar question. Yeah, I mean, I think there are some things you can't automate. Service industry work is one of them, which is one of the reasons a lot of unions are focused on organizing service industry work at this point, because it is the work of the future. But it's the automation stuff. I mean, we've already seen it decimate mining. We've seen what automation does in a lot of industrial settings. So, and you've seen it in your local grocery store. You now need one checker to watch, 8 U-scans instead of 3 checkers to actually, serve people. And it's just, which is why, by the way, I always go through the actual human checkout line. Yep. But, that automation question is a really, really prickly one, and it really is pretty industry specific as well. And I think, to be perfectly honest, some unions are doing better at trying to get ahead of the curve than others.